Hi, everybody. I'm David Leventhal. I am very pleased to be back here. Some familiar faces. I'm Brown, class of '95. That's probably the most significant piece of data to give you right now. Loved it here and always loved coming back here. And had I was in the dance program here with Julie, which I adored, and then went on and danced professionally with Mark Morris Dance Group in New York. And during the course of my time at Mark Morris Dance Group, we began a program that offered dance classes for people with Parkinson's disease, which is ostensibly why I'm here to talk to you today. So my official title is Program Director for the Dance for PD program at Mark Morris Dance Group. And in that position, I wear many hats. I oversee a network of classes that are based on the model that we started in Brooklyn. But I also teach very actively in the program. We have 6 classes now in the New York area, one at our dance center in Brooklyn and 5 in our other boroughs. I also help other teachers in the network, like Rachel, develop and launch classes in their own communities and create resources for them to use and to help their own professional development. Among other initiatives, I'm focused on helping launch as many classes as we can in communities where there's a need, helping to foster research in this kind of work, the intersection of dance and Parkinson's as well as other neurological conditions, looking at how technology can be leveraged to help people with Parkinson's access the field of dance. And I'll be talking about all these things in the next couple hours we have together. So I thought what I would do to start, we have a couple of different things, a couple of different warm-up acts. The first, which I think is just a very good overview because it tells a personal story. And in my view, personal stories are the best research we have out there because they really, when it comes down to it, this program is about a group of individuals, many thousands of individuals at this point, who are impacted by this kind of program. We're not discouraging of quantitative research that looks at numbers and that tries to draw some general trends and conclusions from what we do, but the most effective way of knowing the impact of what we do is by looking at these personal stories. Those of you who are interested in narrative medicine know this as well, but this idea of bringing the story back into medical care, this story that we as artists know is so valuable to the work that we do, whether we're choreographers or whether we're dancers interpreting a particular story, even if that story is abstract. We learn so much by hearing one person's voice and extrapolating from that into understanding how this kind of program affects a whole range of different individuals. So I'm going to show you to start a brief excerpt from a film called Capturing Grace. This is a film about a performance project that we did in Brooklyn with our Dance for PD students from the Brooklyn Parkinson Group and teachers and dancers from Mark Morris Dance Group, as well as some people from outside the company. We had a guest choreographer from Oakland who came in and did some work. So, and I want to start with this because it focuses on one of our participants named Cindy, and it tells a little bit about her story and the way that some of the challenges she has, but also the way that dance affects her life. So I thought we'd start with that. Then I'll give you kind of a brief overview of the program, some background. It'll be conversational. I'll be asking you questions and asking for your input. I'll finish up the first segment of today asking you to think about if you were, because I know many of you come from the science world, if you were to design a randomized controlled study of this kind of program, what are some of the considerations that we need to make? What are some of the outcome measures that you might look at? What would you use as a control? How would you design it so that it impacts the class itself as little as possible? We want people to gain the benefits of being involved with an arts program, not feeling like guinea pigs. So that's going to be our sort of pop quiz at the end. I'm going to ask for your pop quiz discussion before we break. And after the break, we'll do some movement, some more experiential stuff where we'll explore aspects of freezing and balance, which are specific to Parkinson's, and then give you some examples of what we do in the class and kind of analyze them and work through. So you will get to dance, you will get to move, but we'll have a break between the talking and the dancing. At any time, I encourage you to ask questions. This class is for you, so if there's something that you specifically want to address or want to know, let me know. I'm quite flexible. The slides run from beginning to end, probably I could do in 35 minutes, and we have a lot more time than that. So I want you to treat this as a discursive experience, not just as a lecture. But without further ado, a little bit of Capturing Grace, the first 8 minutes, just to give you a little sense and to focus in on one participant's story and her interaction with the program. Okay. And first, a note from our sponsors.
Dance Center, a new show is about to begin.
Just like my teacher said, you know what to do. You know what to do. It's all there. And everybody take a deep breath in.
They've each had something go missing. Steadiness of hand or sureness of step. The once confident stride or arms that swing. Parkinson's claims them one by one, even sometimes the ability to smile. They've each had something go missing, but the dream to move freely never goes away.
And a 5, a 6, a 7, here we go, and. Really emphasizing your plie here, so you're kind of staying low. Changing the arms, 1. Hey, you!
It's a moment to shine, for a Parkinson's patient to shine, to show what we can do, and to say, here I am.
Keep it coming, yes!
There's a joy that I get from moving around. This is an opportunity to dance, and I like to dance. To be able to fly in a organized pattern.
Good. Let's transition into rehearsal. Dance gives people an opportunity to experience what it's like to move with grace and to move with power and to move with passion.
You can do things that you didn't think you could do. And once you relax and let the body take over, it will go.
The dancing part of this isn't a miracle, and it's not a treatment, but I also see this amazing thing of the people who come into the building one way and leave another way. And I don't mean by a different door, I mean that they've been transformed in a certain way.
It's liberated a part of me, a sense of creativity. When the dance class is going on, there are no patients, the dancers.
myself more, which is quite a gift. When I'm slumping, I say to myself, I'm a dancer. I have to say that straight. I'm a dancer. And it gives me motivation to take better care of myself. When the medicine is working, I can almost do everything. It's just that the amounts of time gets shorter and shorter when it functions. Parkinson's forces you to reveal your vulnerabilities. You know, otherwise people mostly try to put on their best face, their best appearance. You know, I'm going out in public, I have to put on this and that, and I have to put my overcoat button it up tight. Well, you can't, if you're going with Parkinson's and you can't button it, you're revealed, you know, there's no way about it. What happens to me when my feet feel like glue and they're stuck on the floor, I sometimes cannot walk, but I can dance. If I can, I'm going to continue an example. Shall I start?
Yeah.
Well, for example, right now I'm walking, you can see my hand is shaking and I have to tremor. And if I try to walk, I have a great deal of difficulty. I can walk a little bit, but if I pretend I'm dancing, I can go. And I don't have any problems. The music leads. In other words, it's not my brain telling me to take a step or to do this or do that. The music is leading me. So I'm like following this wonderful leader who's so mysterious and has such a lovely sound, and it's going to take me to some other place.
What is that?
Well, excuse me. It's a place where you're weightless. You know, your body is just flies. It doesn't tug at you, tug you and pull you and push you and you know, have you in these knots where you can't move and you can't think and you're struggling and fighting. It just, you know, you go above that.
Go, Cindy.
Do you want to leave it this dark or a little more light?
A little more light would be great. Thank you.
Like that or what?
That's great, actually. Thank you. Let's see. Okay. All right. Any themes that stuck out for you? I mean, it's a very short clip, but I think it says a lot. Anything that really stood out for you? Anything she said or anything you observed and how she told that story? Yeah.
Something that really stood out for me, because I've been noticing it in the hazards and the stuff that you've written, is the theme of how letting just the music take over. And it seems like definitely that muscle memory plays a really big part, and when you stop thinking, I'm going to walk now, but just kind of go, I'm going to move with the music now, being able to kind of bypass the difficulty or the brain is having in processing that you want to move somewhere.
Absolutely. And relying on something as fundamental as music, which I think makes all of us want to move in some way. But the idea that she doesn't have to think about it, which is very interesting because in Parkinson's, we'll talk about this later, but in Parkinson's, a lot of people say people with Parkinson's have difficulty doing automatic movements, and so they have to think about each part of it. And we see that to some degree in the dance class, but we also see a lot of what you just witnessed in Cindy's story, which is that she actually doesn't have to think about it. The information is already in the music. Anybody read any research on why music has, we don't know all the answers, but what happens when we listen to music? What happens in the brain when we listen to music that might help her do that? You probably know more about this than I do. Yeah.
So according to my research, music is processed along two dimensions, the temporal and melodic dimension. And then, especially in the melodic dimension, it's divided into different notes, then contours, then scales. And both the contours in the melodic dimension as well as the meter in the temporal dimension help with emotional recognition of the music. Unfortunately, there hasn't been much more research further on that point.
And you're absolutely right. But one of the things you're getting at, which I think is the key thing, is the key element here, is that music fires up many different parts of the brain simultaneously. So many different parts of the brain have to work together to interpret, understand, enjoy, and process that sound. And because of that, areas of the brain that are not functioning so well, in case of Parkinson's, the basal ganglia, can be somewhat bypassed, and other areas can take over and sort of say, well, we're here, and we're excited by this sound, and we can help some of the deficit in the basal ganglia. So the thought is that what's happening in Parkinson's particularly is that it's because it works in so many different parts of the brain, it makes connections between those parts. It's a bit like a detour. Very simplified way of describing it. But if you're interested in this, I encourage you to look at some of the research literature on it, because it's quite interesting. There's a researcher at Harvard named Gottfried Schlaug who works a lot on music and music research and how it affects the brain. Does he come this week here? Okay, and then next another time. But anyway, very interesting work. Similar for people with aphasia who have difficulty getting words out, but can sing Happy Birthday, because it uses different parts of the brain. So, great. What other things did you witness off the bat? Yeah.
This was in both Cindy's and I couldn't say his name, but the detachment from the idea of therapy, which is very important. Because it doesn't have to be specified therapy, because I feel like the things Cindy said are very universal. I say dance is therapy. So I'll just be being sentimental. I'll just take it. But the detachment from it being therapy in a way you might need to fix. Like Laura said, like there's change, but it's not like you're making it better.
Absolutely. And there's something, as I know my colleague Pam Quinn, who was here last year, talks a bit about the placebo effect. And I wouldn't say there's a placebo effect necessarily in dance, because dance has a lot of benefits that we'll talk about. But there's something in the placebo of it not being therapy, that I'm doing something, I'm not calling it therapy, and in not calling it therapy, that in itself is a benefit. So when we go to therapy, we're there to fix a specific problem, right, a specific challenge. And we therefore measure our experience in that process very critically. Have we succeeded in that therapy? Are we getting better? Are we not getting better? We judge ourselves based on the results. But in a dance class, where it's a much more open format, we're not really there to solve a problem or fix a challenge. It changes how people think about their level of success. And for many people in this group, showing up and doing some of the moves in the class is a huge success. Even just getting out of the house is a huge success. So it totally transforms that. And so context is very important. We'll talk about this a little bit later in the discussion, but context is very important. Not having it billed as therapy. You can see Cindy just having a great time in her living room. It doesn't even have to be a class for it to have benefits. So great observation. What else? What other things came to mind? Yeah.
The idea of flying, as mentioned by many participants, kind of this idea where they're like in their physical shape, they may not be very healthy, but they, cognitively and like emotionally, they're still like trying to aim for things, still wanting to experience like
Great contribution. I think that this idea of how the imagination, which is still very much alive and healthy in these participants, can play such a vital role. And if harnessed, it can help them overcome some of the concrete physical challenges that they have. So for her, this idea of flying, of feeling free, of feeling unhinged from the pulls and the tugs of her own body, even if she still has some difficulty in that, it's imaginatively taking her to a different, as she says, a different place. One of the things that I heard was this idea of motivation. She says, I think of myself differently because I'm a dancer. My identity has shifted, right? I sit up differently. I take care of myself better. And that's a very important component. I think perhaps one of the key components of doing this kind of arts-based program as opposed to therapy. When in therapy, you're maybe told to take better care of yourself, and you're given prescriptive steps to do that, but we all know that doesn't necessarily translate into action. But if you're feeling a certain way, if you see yourself in a certain way, I see myself as a dancer, or in this case, I see myself as a dancer who's preparing for a performance, then people embody those transformative changes in a different way than if they're just prescribed something. And we've seen that in this group very dramatically, that people take on the identity as dancers. And of course, in my book, I don't see that as taking on, I see that as transformation. There's another quote in this film where Joy Esterberg, who's right there, talks about the experience of, it's not like I really am a dancer. I pretend to be a dancer, and therefore I can do all these things. And I argued with her about it. I said, but you are a dancer. The whole idea of this program is that you become this other thing because you're doing it. And Pam and I had a whole discussion last week actually about the idea of sort of faking it, and how if you fake it long enough, you actually become that thing. There's a professor actually who had significant, I think she had a stroke and significant brain damage, and they asked her, after she'd gone through rehab, they asked her to do a presentation. And she said, I'm not ready to do that. I wouldn't be able to get through my slides. But they said, well, you'll be fine, And she panicked about it, and then a friend of hers said, why don't you just fake it? Just fake your way through it. You don't have to know the numbers, just fake your way through it. And she said she did it, and she got through it, and actually it was pretty good. And then she kept doing that over the course of the next 6 months, just a series of these lectures. And she realized that by the end of those 6 months, she had mastery again. She was able to do it. So sometimes by taking on this role, we actually then become the role, which of course is what dance performance and theater performance is all about, right? We take on a role. It doesn't feel like it's us, but then we rehearse so many times that we become Hamlet, or we become King Lear. Be careful of those people, by the way. So, just a quick overview. I know you've just started semester, but I wanted to make sure we're all on the same page about Parkinson's. Can we just get on the table some key symptoms, some key manifestations of Parkinson's, so we are all kind of on the same page? Anybody? What's the symptom? Yes? Tremor. Okay, so generally a resting tremor that happens when somebody's not trying to do something, just sitting at rest. Yes?
Sporadic jerks and motions.
Okay, yeah, which you saw Cindy, sort of a dyskinesia, which for most people is a result of medication, actually. This kinetic movement is not a Parkinson's symptom specifically related to pathology of Parkinson's. It tends to be related to dosage of medication, which means that a lot of people are living with it, and it's a very recognizable manifestation. What else? Rigidity, yes, very good. So rigidity, kind of a lockdown of the body, a loss of fluidity. Remember the basal ganglia, where the damage to the dopamine-producing cells occurs? Actually in the substantia nigra, which is inside the basal ganglia. It's responsible not just for motor control, but for smooth motor control, our ability to link movements together. So often with Parkinson's, you see a ratcheting action, the inability to connect steps, something that Julie probably talks about in dance class, of sequencing and finding legato through movement. So yes, rigidity is a huge one of the main forming cardinal symptoms. What else?
Freezing.
Freezing, yeah. What do you mean by freezing?
I don't know.
Like
No, just like when they want to move, they just have like an inability, for some reason, some connections lost.
Great, yes, the inability to initiate movement, to initiate that first step, can happen when somebody's sitting down or somebody's standing, and the feeling that's described is like my feet are glued to the floor. Yeah?
This might be related to the other two, but they can't do facial expressions very well.
Exactly, facial masking. Yeah, and you heard Dave Iverson, the narrator, talk about even the ability to smile. It's part of facial masking, which again is the inability for the neurotransmitter, which in this case is dopamine, primarily dopamine, to be present in sufficient quantities to get signals from basal ganglia, which says go, to the body, which is waiting to receive that information. So the steep decline in that neurotransmitter means all muscle groups are affected, including the face, rest of the body. Parkinson's is not a muscular disease, although the muscles, the messages that go to muscles are affected. It's a neurological disease. It happens in the brain. But again, because that chemical is lacking, a lot of things that rely on those kinds of inputs are more challenging. And this is one of the things that is most frustrating for participants. Something like a tremor is irritating and it can be exhausting, but most people say, over time you just sort of get used to it being there. And it is one of the things that is positively impacted by deep brain stimulation, some of the medical treatments, and pharmaceutical intervention. But the inability to express with your face or to smile means that people are constantly misreading you, right? Right now, as a speaker, I'm relying on your facial input to let me know whether I'm boring you or whether you have a question or whether you're interested in something. When you're speaking to a room of people with Parkinson's disease, more than half of them will not be registering expression on their face. It's very hard to tell if they're engaged at all in what you're saying, if they're angry at you, if they disagree with you. And generally, they're enjoying the class, in this case a dance class, perfectly well, but you can't tell that from their face. And that's difficult on both sides. So it's one of those symptoms that neurologists acknowledge, they really can't do anything about. And it's one of the symptoms that's most frustrating for people with Parkinson's. So good, yeah?
Gait.
Yeah, gait's affected, exactly. The typical one is sort of this shuffling stance where the weight comes forward and people take little steps, sort of arrhythmic steps, as opposed to a regular walk where we set a pace. We can go faster or we can go slower, but the stride length is pretty much even as we go. And with Parkinson's, that starts to change. So the shuffling, the weight forward, steps of uneven width, all those things start to be seen. Anything else?
Like the back posture that
Right. Yes, postural changes. Absolutely. Yeah. You see it sitting, you see it standing, kyphosis, right? The head coming forward. A lot of these things are things that we see naturally in the aging process, and I'll talk about that in a second. But yes, the posture changes. Sometimes people have Parkinson's on one side, or they have dystonia on one side, so the muscles contract, so they're off on one side. One of the participants at the beginning was walking a bit like this. So that can happen, head forward, and that causes a lot of changes in balance, both the placement of your body, but also sort of an internal awareness, proprioceptive awareness of balance, where you are on your feet at any one time. So of course, dancers work on a lot. So, good. Anything else? Yes.
In extreme cases and towards the end, dementia.
Yes, exactly. Glad you raised that. Dementia is a big one. Actually, up to 70% of people with Parkinson's experience some kind of minor cognitive impairment. And especially towards the end, stages 4 and 5, you'll see more, not in everybody, but a number of people experiencing a more advanced degree of dementia. Memory challenges are present as well in Parkinson's, and as we are all too acutely aware, a few weeks after Robin Williams' death, depression is a huge factor. About 40 to 50% of people experience depression as part of living with Parkinson's. In fact, some scientists, doctors see depression as an early sign of Parkinson's. So it doesn't mean that if you develop depression in your 50s, that you're going to develop Parkinson's. But there's a higher incidence of depression leading to Parkinson's. And there's a link between people who develop depression in their 50s and a link to those people developing Parkinson's. So, and Alzheimer's. So depression as a precursor to neurological disease.
The violent sleep patterns and the loss of smell.
Yes.
Things that you don't know about a person, but are
Yeah.
signs.
Yeah, but actually impact the class, because a lot of people come in, they're quite tired, and they're just not sleeping well. Fatigue is a result of a number of factors, including having to deal with things like dyskinesia. Imagine if you were moving like this all day long, and you couldn't really control it. So it's a lot of energy spent, or a tremor. But also people just not sleeping well. People having restless leg syndrome, REM sleep disorders, where they sort of act out their dreams physically, punching, kicking, running. Even most of you in this room, if you're dreaming about running, you're not actually running, you're fast asleep like this. But people with sleep disorders will actually start to move in their sleep. It's one of those strange paradoxes of Parkinson's. So they have trouble moving during the day, but at night their bodies sort of go full tilt. So very tiring, disruptive sleep patterns are quite common. Sense of smell, again, there's some research to look at that as one of the markers, the precursors of developing Parkinson's. That people lose their sense of smell in the 40s and 50s, that there's some indication that might lead to Parkinson's, because there's a connection between the way that olfactory senses are processed and the way that and the basal ganglia, where the Parkinson's related dopamine cells are starting to die. So they're looking at that. Also speech patterns. There's a new app that you can use on your phone that actually detects your speech patterns and can tell you if you're, I think it's a 92% accuracy rate, tell you if you're developing Parkinson's. It's pretty interesting. It uses an algorithm that was taken from 1,000 samples of people with Parkinson's and changes in their voice, because again, the voice box is a muscle, it's controlled by muscles. So changes in the voice box can indicate the early indication of Parkinson's. And one of the challenges of Parkinson's is that doctors tend not to be able to diagnose it until 60 to 70% of the cells that produce dopamine are already dead. Can you imagine if you translate that to other diseases like cancer, if in almost every case we discovered a tumor when it was 60 to 70% along its path? And that would be a terrible trajectory for cancer patients. Fortunately, because of technology, we're able to detect a lot of cancers very early. It's very unusual for people to detect Parkinson's early. And one of the amazing things is that the brain has been able to do pretty well in terms of initiating movement and all of the things that happen in basal ganglia, with up to 50 to 60% of the cells already dead, the dopamine producing cells. So we can compensate, kind of like a jet plane flying without one of the jets. Like they can do it. If one of the jets goes out, they can actually still continue the flight and land safely. And it's a bit like that with our brains and dopamine. We can actually do pretty well, i.e. symptoms not really showing, until 50 to 70% of those cells are already dead. But the challenge is that once we hit that point, it's very difficult to, you certainly can't go backwards, and there are certain treatments that can slow the progression, but you've already lost 70% of your dopamine producing capacity. So it's a challenge. The message of this slide is that Parkinson's affects all ages. People in their 30s get it. People in their 80s get it, and anything in between. So it's one of the challenges is that people, particularly those with early onset is before 50, which is about 10 to 15% of cases, really have to live with this disease for a long, long time. Parkinson's, people with Parkinson's say, well, the good thing about Parkinson's is it doesn't kill you. And the bad thing about Parkinson's is it doesn't kill you. Most people will die of something related to Parkinson's or something completely other. But people have the challenge of living with this chronic condition for a long time. And so it becomes much more than simply a movement disorder or a medical condition. It becomes a quality of life issue. How do we maintain our quality of life when we have something that impacts our quality of life so much for 20, 25, 30 years? Particularly if you're diagnosed in your 40s or your 50s. And so this is a place where the medical professionals put up their hands a bit because they have treatments that are quite good, pharmacological treatments and surgical treatments, but they don't really address a lot of the quality of life issues that people have to deal with day in and day out. And that's, I would argue, where the arts start to come in. More on that. People often find that they become kind of permanently labeled as a patient, and often label themselves as a patient. We've heard stories of people say, when they introduce themselves and they say, I have Parkinson's, as their tag, their label. And it's hard not to, it'd be easy to understand why this happens. Think about the sort of, the amount of time you have to spend dealing with this kind of disease. You have to adhere to a fairly strict medication schedule because you want to stay at a level where the artificial dopamine that's being put into your system is consistent and doesn't cause you to have off periods. Off periods tend to be when you freeze more, when you have more trouble initiating movement, when your tremor increases. So people try to maintain a very consistent pill schedule, which is hard. And you're going around your daily lives. Imagine if every 2 hours you had to take a pill. Just think about your lives, your class schedule, your social schedule. Maybe some of you are working, and just your alarm goes off. You gotta get water. You gotta get a pill. It's hard. It's hard to keep that going. In addition to that, you're kind of surrounded by your symptoms. You're surrounded by people worrying about you. You're surrounded by a partner or caregiver who's trying to take care of you. You're talking about Parkinson's a lot. You're thinking about it a lot. So your life becomes, in some ways, medicalized, and you see yourself very much as a patient, even as you fight against it. You saw Cindy as part of her day measuring out her pills. It sort of takes over your life in a way. And I would argue that for Parkinson's in particular, it's a really interesting window into the aging process in general. Because if you think about the symptoms of Parkinson's, balance impairment, depression, cognitive changes, slowness of movement, things some of you didn't talk about, bradykinesia, the inability to move quickly, dementia, challenge with short-term memory, changes in how you interact socially with other people. All of these things we all will experience as we get older. It's just part of the natural, quote-unquote, healthy aging process. But with Parkinson's, all these things become a bit more compressed. They happen in a shorter time. You might get several of them at once, and they happen at a younger age, especially with young onset. So for those of you who are specifically interested in Parkinson's, that's great. For those of you who are interested in a more general question of aging and perhaps other diseases of aging, it's a very clear window into that process, and also a clear window of how easy it is for people who are getting older to be boxed into a certain identity. We may have this in our own families. Oh, well, that person's in a nursing home, checked out of life, never see them. We don't know what their social interactions are. They're not involved with the arts. So there are a lot of sort of extrapolations we can make from Parkinson's to just the general aging population. And that's what I'm looking at here. So with other diseases of aging, with aging in general, and with Parkinson's, there are three things that I think are generally de-emphasized by the medical community. One is the value of physical activity. Now this is changing a little bit. We've seen enough research on exercise to know that this is sort of a standard prescription now, that a physician will say, you need to get more exercise, or you need to go and be more active. But there really isn't, and often there isn't more specificity around that. People aren't given specific activities. They aren't, because of rules that hospitals have, they maybe aren't led to a specific class. They can't actually endorse a specific program, particularly if it's not evidence-based. So they'll say, well, go look for stuff in your community. But they're not giving any more specifics about that. And we also have to remember that to 20 years ago, people with Parkinson's were told that it was that exercise and physical activity was counterindicated. It was actually dangerous to exercise. I'm worried that you'll fall. I don't want you to go out and exercise. And so they actually didn't. That's fortunately changed thanks to some really undeniable research on physical activity, particularly treadmill and tandem bike activities. The second thing that is not really taught people with Parkinson's is how to move. Once you have a diagnosis, what are some strategies that I can use to help overcome freezing? What are some strategies I can use to maintain my balance? It doesn't tend to be something that's covered in the doctor's office. It tends to be done by a physical therapist or an occupational therapist. So people have to have that other level of information. But dancers have a lot of information and a lot of strategies about how to move, how to remember and learn, how to learn and remember movement, how to initiate movement, how to use music to help the body to move. So again, a piece that's missing, a lack, and something that dancers can bring to the table. The third is quality of life. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but this idea that Parkinson's is more than just a movement disorder, it's a quality of life disorder for the whole person and that person's family. So what are doctors and medical industry doing to help quality of life people with Parkinson's? And there really isn't a pill that can improve quality of life. It's a whole platform of activities that people need to start engaging in, including dance, including meditation, acupuncture, eating well, sort of this idea of it takes a village. And this is probably, I think, the biggest case for me of having dance as part of this pie. So there have been a number of traditional or activities that have traditionally been helpful for Parkinson's. They tend to be based more on, I would say, a therapeutic fitness level. Zumba is probably the one that comes closest to dance, but Zumba, as you know, those of you who've done it, it's a workout. It's a fitness activity. It's based to some degree on some social dancing. And all of these share a basic fitness philosophy, which is we're working on strength, stamina, flexibility, and coordination. And these are all very, very important for Parkinson's. Rachel and I were talking about Rock City Boxing. Here's Rock City Boxing. This woman is giving it her all. And a number of activities like boxing, tai chi, tandem bike, riding have been shown to have beneficial effects on specific symptoms. So exercise tends to address these 5 things. The first 3 are really the principles for any kind of fitness program, right? Strength and stamina, flexibility, and stability. The last 2 I added because they're Parkinson's specific, and these are things that we've seen in the research, particularly in the tandem bike study, that are issues that are addressed by specific exercise modalities. There's insight. There's a whole bunch of gray stuff here that we'll address later, and this is this gray stuff. I think. Let me go back there for a second. This gray stuff is, I think, where dance sets itself apart as a distinct and beneficial activity, and those benefits are linked to the fact that dance is an art form. Yes, it's a physical form, it's movement, it's exercise, people do it for exercise, but it's so much more than that. When you think about the expressive, imaginative, creative elements of dance, the social aspects of dance, you start to see dance form borders with other things. And again, all of these things are valuable. I'm not trying to create a hierarchy. I'm simply saying that there's some things that are distinct to the dance, to dance as an art form, that make it particularly valuable for people with PD. So dance as Luxembourg, make your own conclusions. But bordered on all sides by other things, and I often get calls saying, I'm a fitness teacher, I'd love to learn how to dance for PD. And this is one of the hardest calls because it's really, I understand your interest, do you have any dance training? You say, no, but I've been doing fitness for years, I got this. And when you think about the number of years, the amount of training that dancers go through to get to a level where they can feel confident, I don't even mean to get to be professional performers, but just to a level where they feel confident in their movements. And think about all the information, think about all the tools that they've developed over that time. It's not something that we can just teach in 3 days. You really need to be working on it for a long, long time, and that's what I tell our friends from the fitness field. So what's so special about dance anyway, and why is dance particularly valuable for Parkinson's? Well, when you think about the training that dancers have, and this is dancers at all forms, ballet, modern, hula, flamenco, these things I think are universal, certainly intentional, right? So dancers are trained to move with intent. It's not just a free-for-all. Even if it is a free-for-all, there's some structures and very clear ideas about how we're moving loosely, right? So there's quality of movement. I'm going to jump to expressive and think about the tools that are taken away from people with Parkinson's, the ability to use their face, their ability to project with their voice, their ability to project intonation with their voice. All of those tools of theater that we might think of, right, expressing ourselves, are taken away. So to have dancers who are constantly thinking about how we can express with our bodies and reroute expression into maybe just a hand, or maybe just a shoulder, or maybe it's a leg, that kind of process is really helpful for folks with PD. Complex is also important because it starts to get into the area of neuroplasticity. When we do activities that are complex and difficult, we are actually building more brain cells, even in a brain that has Parkinson's. The other thing with complex is it contrasts very dramatically with something like running, which is a beneficial activity in terms of aerobics and in terms of getting diminishing some of the symptoms, but it's not very complex. It's really like two things happening. My feet are going left to right, my arms are going left to right. And I could do that for 45 minutes and really extract some deep benefits from it. But neurologically, cognitively speaking, there's not a lot going on. That's why we have to listen to music to take our mind off how boring it is, or to watch video in the gym, watch a television show, or something like that. We take our mind away from the activity. In dance, you have to bring your mind to the activity. And that's a critical difference because the movement itself is complex. We have to think about it. We have to process it. We have to feel it. And we have to feel something about it. Strategic, another very key word, and something that I think that Oli Westheimer, who was the woman who came up with this idea for a program, mentioned in their first meeting, dancers have strategies for doing things. Dancers have a strategy for turning without getting dizzy. It's called spotting. We look at one point in the room, we keep our head there, and then at the last minute, we bring our head around and look at that same point. That's a strategy. That's something that we train to do over the course of many, many years, and we can do multiple turns because of that. Ice skaters do not spot. They just turn, right? And then I can see they don't get dizzy. Maybe they do. But dancers spot their turns, and that's something you do. Using your plie when you land from a jump. Oh, ouch. Takes the energy into the floor and takes it out of your joint. It's just pure physics, and it works, and it's something that dancers train to do. I just saw a research project that looked at injuries, ACL injuries. You know the ACL? Anterior cruciate ligament? Yeah. Anyone had an ACL tear? Very painful. It takes a long time to heal. I'm glad that I didn't know that. Anyway, they looked at the way that dancers train to jump and the way that athletes train to jump. And they did a lot of slow motion analysis of both sets, landing from jumps. And what they found was that dancers land like this, and athletes land like this. Because they haven't spent 10 years training to line up their legs and their feet or working in parallel. They don't really train to jump. They just jump. They're trained to score. They're trained to play as a team. But they don't really work on alignment unless they get injured. In the same way that dancers spend many, many years working on that. So even though both are high-risk activities, the rate of ACL tears in dancers who are same age, working as hard, doing very difficult changes of direction, just like a basketball player does. Much lower rates of ACL tears than the same when matched for age and demographics, much lower rate than the athletes. So training, strategies, what strategies can we use to prevent injury, but also to initiate movement? And finding meaningful movement, right? What does this mean, meaningful movement? Well, telling a story through gesture gives a reason for moving. It's not just one foot in front of the other. It's actually having a narrative come out of your body and expressing that narrative to someone else in the room or to the whole group or to yourself, as Cindy's doing. So maybe that movement is meaningful because it feels good, or maybe it's meaningful because you're telling a specific story. In any case, dancers always have some kind of meaning in the movement, even if it's an abstracted meaning, like I'm trying to move with a specific quality. So the idea here was, let's take dancers who have all this information, expertise, and let's see what happens when we share it with folks with Parkinson's. Well, the first thing is that strength, flexibility, and balance and gait as well are all part of dance training. So the sort of more athletic parts of the elements that we saw talked about what is it, what are the elements of exercise that make it exercise? Those elements are all integrated into dance training. We think about strengthening, we look at ballet bar or Horton exercise, very, very strengthening. Flexibility, of course, is worked on. Balance is worked on. So those things off the top are just already covered. Well, here's where dance starts to take off a bit from other types of movement. Dance is first and foremost a mental activity. We have to think about it in order to do it. We have to learn quite complicated sequences of movement. Even a simple sequence of movement is complicated because there are steps that we may never have put together before. Dance is constantly combining and recombining material, even if it's just 4 moves, in a way that makes us think differently about how we sequence movement. So it's not just walking, it's not just sliding, it's multi-directional. And we have to try to remember that and integrate it into our bodies using our minds. Here's another big one, music. We talked about this earlier. The way that dancers use music is very different from the way that other movers use music. Other people who move to music often will just use it as a rhythmic basis. And of course dancers do that too. But we think about melody, we think about tone, we think about harmony, we think about form in music, the bigger picture of how music is organized, and all of those things start to influence the way that we move. We use form a lot in our class, where we'll have one set of choreography that goes to the verse and another set of choreography that goes to the chorus. So we're differentiating, we're identifying one set of movement with one part of the song and another set of movement with another part of the song. And that's starts to build a bigger picture of how we think about how we think about phrasing our movements in general, rather than just the same 2 steps repeated. There's a lot more to say about music, but I'm going to move along. Aesthetic and functional goals. In a standard physical therapy intervention, the goals are primarily, almost entirely functional. Right? How can we move better using this particular exercise? Or what exercise can I develop to help you do this particular activity or to help you overcome this particular symptom? And that happens to some degree in dance training too, but dancers are always thinking about images and the aesthetic, how something looks to initiate the movement. So in this lift, which is from a piece of Marx called Allegro, yes, it's a basic press of someone over someone's head, and that's what we see from here. But really, they are working together to create the effect that she's a bird in flight. And it's a beautiful part of the piece, because everything just suspends for a moment at the very top before she comes back down. Because Julie and Peter are both thinking of the idea of birds and the idea of flight, they're able to create this effect without thinking of it as a very, very difficult lift that he has to heave her up. And in fact, because he's thinking about the aesthetics of it, it changes the way that he does it. He does it with grace and he does it with fluidity, as opposed to that, which I actually sometimes see in ballet, right? So here, the aesthetic goals sort of overcome the difficulty of the functional goals, and the same thing happens in the Dance for Parkinson's class. We do some difficult things, but if we're using imagery in the service of those goals, we can actually bypass some of the difficulties, some of the things that people otherwise couldn't do, and allow them to discover things they still can do. Something like walking, for example. If we give somebody a way to walk, a quality of walking, or we set up a pattern of walking, which we'll do later in this class, you start to think of it as a dance, as a group activity, as a communicative activity, not so much as, let me put one foot in front of the other, which is really hard for me to do. And you saw that in Cindy's example perfectly, right? I can't walk, but I can dance. So as much as we all fantasize about having our solos out on stage, most dancers spend most of their time dancing in groups. And for the better, I think. We've probably danced in groups since dance was invented way back in like 10,000 BC. So the idea of dancing as a village, dancing in community, dancing together, dancing as a reinscription of social relationships in a particular community, perhaps even a reinscription of power dynamic in that community, is something that has been carried through the art form ever since it came about. Certainly part of Mark's aesthetic, and certainly part of the Dance for Parkinson's idea that, yes, we each have individual challenges, and we all come into the room with different things, but we're there to support each other in the act of dancing, the act of doing something that's quite challenging. And because of that, we have the support of the group, and we're creating bonds among each other. One of the things that I see in the class that's it's wonderful, and as a teacher, I have to rein it in, is that we'll take a little break when we move the chairs out from the center and we move them to the sides. And I'm always under time pressure because, the class is an hour and 15 minutes, I have a lot that I want to do, and of course everybody else has another idea. So when the chairs are moved away, it becomes social hour. Everybody's connecting, they're talking, they're kibitzing, it's like, and we're still in no class. So every week I say, okay, everybody over here. Nobody hears me at all. I say it louder. Now I know from the perspective of analysis, from an analytical viewpoint, that this is a very healthy dynamic of the class, right? That the social component is critical, particularly for a group of people who often feel very isolated. They feel cut off. They have trouble going out of their homes. They have trouble feeling comfortable in public because people have difficulty. If they don't have Parkinson's, they see someone in a grocery store like this and they think they're drunk, right? And many people have come up to, I've told stories about being approached out in public and sort of carted away until they said, I'm sorry, this is how I have Parkinson's. I'm not drunk. I don't have a problem. I just have Parkinson's. So people kind of make their social circles smaller and smaller and smaller. And this is a way for them to expand and to reconnect. We talked a bit about this already, but the idea of telling stories through movements, that going from a place where people feel inhibited from expression because of their symptoms to a place where they're given the tools to express is a major goal of what we do. And we use repertory often to do that because a lot of Mark's rep is very much based on storytelling and gestural physicality. There's another difference perhaps from other forms of exercise, and particularly physical therapy, where we might work on one discrete element, right, lifting our arm, or working on foot exercise. The body is separated, analyzed, exercised, and then put back together. And in dance, it's a much more holistic approach. Yes, we do isolations, we do work on specific parts, but towards the end of class, we're looking for a full body integration of everything working together. And that's very useful for people with Parkinson's who feel like their body parts take on very distinct personalities. My right arm doesn't move, my left arm has a life of its own, I drag my left foot, everything starts to work against each other, and dance through music can be quite a unifying activity for them. In addition to, of course, the face, and it's something that we do introduce quite often in our activities of telling a story using our arms, our feet, and our face, or using playing gestural expression games, or passing on, saying an emotion, having people be do anger or joy. So we'll use the face much more in this class than say I would in an open professional modern class that I would teach. Yes.
Does that, in the same way that they're saying they could sometimes not walk but they could dance, does that work for people with facial masking? Are they able to conjure up those expressions?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that care partners and spouses tell us is, oh, I didn't know that my partner could smile that much. Because people really smile a lot in this class unconsciously. It's not like they're trying to smile, it's just that they have a good time. So they're processing patterns differently for whatever reason, neuroscientifically. So yes, we see facial expression here that their partners may not see outside of the class. I don't know because I only see them in the class, but I know from anecdotes, and also there was a facial expression is one of the markers on the UPDRS, which is the Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale. It's the thing that neurologists will use at a checkup. And it is one of the tests, and there was a study that looked at facial expression among a number of factors, and there was a improved use of the face through this 12-week dance class. So we do see that. And again, whether it's conscious or unconscious, not exactly sure. So going back to our chart here, and making a case for expanding that into a whole lot of other important things that I think all of you are going to get. I usually spend a lot of time on this when I'm talking to neurologists, because they know this is important, but they don't know how to focus on it. They don't have a pill really to address confidence. They don't have any kind of surgery that will help people think aesthetically or deal with social interaction. And mood is a big one, particularly in the context of Robin Williams' suicide, because I think when we're looking at depression, yes, there certainly are therapies that people can use for depression, but the best therapy is really transforming the way that you think about yourself and transforming the environment in which you have social interactions. If your social interactions are limited and you feel trapped at home and you're not communicating with people, you're much more prone to depression than if you're out and about in the community, you're engaged, you're working through and expressing some of your feelings in a safe arts environment rather than isolated from people who can help you. So another thing I want to focus on here is adherence. Anyone know what this is? What this refers to? Adherence. Adherence is really the ability to stick with something, or literally to adhere, right? But in this case, in terms of research, how likely is it that person will continue the activity? So what we've seen is that things like tandem bike and treadmill studies have good benefits, but the intensity of those activities is pretty high. For the tandem bike study, it was 3 times a week for 45 minutes each time at 90 revolutions per minute, which is a pretty brisk rate. And what happened was the adherence after the study was done dropped off. People didn't want to do it because it was hard, it was boring. They did feel better at the end, but it was a lot of work with that. Dance doesn't have the same aerobic benefits, but people go back to it. People go back to it because they enjoy it, it's creative, they get to think, they get to be with other people, it's social, and they love the music. So a very high adherence rate with slightly less aerobic benefit is probably in the long run better than a full high intensity aerobic impact with good benefits in terms of symptoms, but after a year, nobody's doing it. We would like to have people actually maintaining their engagement and their activity over the course of their whole life with Parkinson's, because that's what it takes to manage it well. Confidence also keeps coming back as a huge benefit of the class. I feel more confident doing activities at home. I feel more confident dancing at a wedding. I feel more confident reaching for that top shelf in my house that I couldn't reach before. And that starts to play into other aspects of people's lives. People feel more confident physically. They're able to go out and try other activities. They're able to get out of the house more. They're able to maybe try an exercise class in addition to the dance class. So it starts to impact how they feel about their own competence. So this is why I argue that dance really needs to have a place at the table, and in many ways, I think is the perfect art form to be part of Parkinson's management. People do many other things. They sing, they paint, people do theater, and all these things are great because dance has a physical component, because it addresses physical strategies as well as all the things like mood and social interaction. It really is a powerhouse of potential benefit. And that's really what Oli Westheimer, who's pictured here, had in mind when she approached us. Oli had spent a lot of time listening to people in a group, a support group, talk about the challenges they have with Parkinson's. And she said, well, let's think about something that doesn't have anything to do with Parkinson's, but has everything to do with Parkinson's. And dance can, for many of the participants, is an escape. It's an oasis. It's a step away from Parkinson's. But at the same time, everything that we work on in the dance class has a direct head-on impact on symptoms and on how people feel about themselves. So it's a double-edged sword in that way. It's an escape, and it's very, I think, without really designing something for Parkinson's specifically, it's a very well-designed movement form for this particular condition. So Oli approached the dance group because we had a new building, and she was very interested in a statement that our executive director made, which was, we would like our doors to be open to the community. We would like to be a community resource. And Oli read that and said, I want to be part of that. We are the community. We want to see what we can do. So she approached the company. She also knew the company's aesthetic, and she knew that one of the features of the aesthetic was this idea of that the dances looked like anybody could do them. And that's not necessarily true. We learned that many places last year. That the choreography is really hard, but there's a pedestrian, almost a casual aspect to some of the choreography that really comes from Mark's folk dance roots. Mark started his dancing life as a folk dancer with a group in Seattle, and with a very strong emphasis, of course, on the group and on folk style, which is very different from ballet or classical modern dance. And I think that aesthetic still infiltrates a lot of the work, this idea that dance is something that anybody can do, that anybody should have access to, and that works best when it's done as a group, that the dance itself is only as strong as the least experienced link. And I think that's something that attracted Oli to the group and to the company. So we started offering class in 2001, really without any knowledge of Parkinson's. You know more about Parkinson's now than I did when I started teaching. And over time, this collaboration developed to create a program that is now spread all over the place. So the dance group really brought teaching experience and the resources of teachers in space and music. And BPG brought contact with people with Parkinson's and sort of expertise about what they were going through, and also at the beginning of the program, what their reactions to the class were. We did a lot of feedback sessions where we learned from participants themselves what it was that they liked and what was valuable to them. And this kind of started us thinking about how to measure impact, which is a very, very difficult thing to do, and this is where I'm going to ask for your assistance. So what are some of the ways that we might measure the class's impact, aside from having feedback sessions at the end of each class, which is a very useful thing? How do we measure what happens in the class to make the case for this program? Yes?
Why do you think people keep coming back? That's a sign that
Yeah, great. This adherence rate, this idea of measuring attendance. How many people come back? How many people don't come back? How regularly do people come back? Great. Yes?
you can do a longitudinal study of gait speed based on before and after, or on the P scale about rigidity.
PDRS, yes. exactly, yeah, longitudinal study. And how long do you think would be appropriate?
I don't know, anywhere from like 3 months plus.
This one's more qualitative again, but once people start making creative suggestions about what they want to do in class or wanting to choreograph their own pieces, I think
Yes.
that's from a dancing perspective, that's the next step.
Something we might call buy-in, right? Participant buy-in. If are they that involved in the program, they actually start making suggestions about what they want to do, even suggesting to do performance. And actually, maybe you knew this, but you picked up on something that is true for this program, which is that the whole performance project that the film is about came from the idea of one participant who went to see a performance of the dance group and said, I want to do that piece. I don't know how, but I want to do it. And I said, well, great, let's do it. And it took us 4 years to figure out exactly how to do it right. But it came from an idea of one of the members of the group. So that kind of buy-in, that kind of engagement is absolutely a measure. What else? Yeah.
I remember when I was in jazz band back in high school, we played one piece like in 8th grade. We played the same piece in 10th grade, played the same piece in 12th grade. And it was really cool to see how the same exact music could be transformed into the experience. Wouldn't it be really cool to have, one piece that tried to look at a range of motion, look at these aspects, and almost document how certain classes experience the first day, and 6 months later, and a year later, and use and almost formulate that choreography to as like a checkbox, but it's still creative. It's still
Great idea. Yeah, using that as like the control,
Yeah.
and then comparing the interactions with that material over time. I love it. How might you use? Is there a way that you could design something that would measure the cognitive activity that happens in the dance class? Because it's a very different cognitive activity that happens in dance than happens in other things, right? A lot of the cognitive tests you may not know are now computer-based, where you're moving shapes to line up and you're looking at patterns and sequences. And that's certainly relevant to cognition. We might see some outcomes in that. But is there another way we could test the kind of cognition that happens in the dance class, which I would argue is much more based on movement and memory, right? Muscle memory and on movement sequencing. How might we test that? How might we set up a study that would test something like that? I mean, that's one idea, right? Seeing people's reactions. But yeah,
This is in an ideal world with funding and something.
we're assuming we're all going to get $1 million grants.
Yes. 5%. Maybe like this is also would like change the community and I feel like also like a scan before and after the class. We continue doing that for every class. But then that encroaches on the fact that this class is not necessarily therapy. So that would affect it in a certain way too.
It could, yes, and certainly the equipment requirements of an fMRI are pretty significant and expensive. But yes, you could certainly see it in terms of brain scan. And there's a preliminary study actually being done on that at York University in Toronto, where they're looking at the local Dance for Parkinson's class there, and they have them learn sort of your idea, learn one dance, and then practice that dance over the course of 12 weeks. They did a brain scan before the class began, and they did one at maybe 6 weeks and one at the end. And what they really were interested in the process, how the brain changes as it learns movement. Now, the challenge with the fMRI is that you can't move in there. You can't actually dance in the fMRI. So what they also trained those participants in was movement visualization. They trained them in the techniques of visualizing movement very clearly in their minds as they listen to the same music. So they learn this piece with music, blah, 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 blah. Then at the end of the 12 weeks, they put them back in the fMRI. They put that music on their headphones, and they listen and they visualize. And actually, they got pretty amazing results. Pretty much the same results that they would have gotten if they were dancing, probably. Yeah.
That's interesting. On another scale, the kinesthetic empathy, they're like trying them watching the movement, maybe like watching their class and seeing, because you have the body memory, so seeing it, your body remembers what it feels like to be doing that, and also like the idea of kinesthetic empathy that you can embody that movement as someone else dances at the same time.
Great.
Like that could be interesting to like scale along.
Absolutely, and we know at least from music that a concert violinist who sits and listens to a piece that she knows is actually going through empathically all of the motor skills that the other violinist is actually using, even though that person is sitting in the theater. So, so the brain is firing in exactly the same way. It's just not actually initiating movement. So it would be interesting to see if the same is true for the part. I bet it would be. People who can recognize movement, who just actually watch it and see whether we can pick that up in the brain scans, or whether they could actually have a screen in the MRI that allows them to watch. Yeah.
Isn't that the mirror neuron? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But for this, it would be movement that they recognize, that they actually learn and knew. So yeah, interesting stuff. Yes.
What if it were rather than an actual visualization of the brain, but simply just a quantitative analysis of how many move and how many variations of those moves they can string together, almost like an IQ test, it's a physical test. And then you frame it up as a game where, we're going to give you X, Y, and Z moves, and then
Like concentration.
Yeah,
is this all something like that?
It's very interesting. This is what I kind of proposed to a neuroscientist, because we're talking about a research study. We want to do a research study, and I talked about cognition as one of the outcomes. And she said, the computer-based cognitive tests, they're okay, but she said, I know about dance, and I know what happens in a class. It's just not going to pick up that stuff in a way that's interesting to you. So I said, well, what if you set up a room that was a bit like an obstacle course? So you had specific tasks over here, and they were difficult tasks, but doable for people with Parkinson's. And on day one, you go through and you have a guide who walks you through all the tasks in a specific order, and then says, okay, and go, and now you have to replicate that, essentially choreography, except it's not necessarily dance movement, but the sequencing is the same. And then at the end of the 12 weeks, it would have to be maybe a different course, because the person had already learned it. So you'd have the same tasks, but maybe in a different order, maybe some new tasks, and see how well, it would be a times test, I guess, see how well that person performs in the new obstacle course. My hypothesis would be that they would be faster, because they'd spent those 12 weeks constantly learning new material, new sequences, remembering those sequences, and improving their cognitive ability to do all that material. So that might be true, or it might not be, I don't know, but it's an interesting thought, right? And I think trying to match a cognitive test that actually picks up on what dance is about is more valuable than doing, just your generic cognitive test. So yeah.
Now I just break the shoes and
Yeah.
because like dancing also sometimes like movement problem solving. So like if it was a movement-based cognitive combined, that you would see how like your ability to create strategies and move as that changed as you got exposed to different strategies in class.
Great, yeah, because a lot of our propaganda is, dance is all about problem solving. Whether you're a choreographer or an interpretive dancer, you are solving problems all the time spontaneously.
That happens in the improv work too. This naturally happens.
Exactly, and it's something that people with Parkinson's have to do all the time. Because you might be going along and you're suddenly starting to feel frozen. How do you, aside from pills, how do you get out of that? How do you talk yourself or think yourself out of that block, or you can't use your left side today? How do you work around that issue? So it's sort of part of their lives anyway. Yeah.
When you talked about facial expressions and how usually on a daily basis it's very hard to read people, but once they get into a class, they actually sometimes are smiling. The caregivers notice. I wasn't thinking in terms of like a scan, but having like even the caregiver just like reporting when they move or when their facial expressions actually change during certain movements throughout a period of time could be really interesting, because that doesn't involve any like machinery in the whole process, but it really gives like an insight to what affects that individual specifically with your family.
That's a great idea. And having it observed by someone who is very aware of that person's natural patterns and knows them well and is in the house. I mean, a lot of this information is difficult to gather because we don't know what happens outside of the class much. And even the tests that are done for studies, they're done in a controlled environment, and the person goes home, and then that's where you really want to know what's happening. as a quality of life condition. We want to know what's happening in their lives, not in sort of artificial. So, yes.
I have 2 questions for you. Do you have
Yeah.
or do most people take their pills right before the class, or is it different for everyone?
It is different for everybody, but most people they medicate in order to be at their best in class. So people don't tend to use the class in lieu of a pill. They tend to use the pill to help them have the best class they can, because they want to be at their best. They want to be able to do everything in the class. Whether that means they take it right before or they take it an hour before, or they all have different gaps or different absorption rates. So it really depends on the individual. But yes, they all time it. Most of them time it so that they're at their apex middle class. Yeah.
Pretty quickly. So in terms of not just like the pills that specifically towards Parkinson's or things like pressure or something like that. I don't know if you know or if people told you just conversation has it affected the amount of pills they normally take or the time, or which I don't know if it would ever do that, or like maybe they want to need to like take the pills or that kind of.
Yeah, we've definitely gotten comments that people can skip a pill if they take the class, or that they find that they need to take a little bit less, and they already be able to cut. Yeah, well, there's something in that, because if you look at things like pills or things like falls, you're looking at the most expensive parts of managing Parkinson's, which starts to get into sort of health economy, right? If you can make the case that this kind of program, and it's not the case that any artist really wants to, we want the program itself to be helpful because it's about creativity and dancing and imagination. But if you take the financial argument that this program can actually reduce medication costs, can reduce doctor's visits, can reduce fall risk, or at least fall severity, then you're pointing to some very large economic benefits, especially as we start to look at consolidated HMO costs and managed healthcare. Those systems are all trying to figure out ways to cut costs across the board. So, and the thing is that prescribing medication does not cut costs. Prescribing a dance class might cut costs. So,
I was just going to say that because versus physical therapy, where you have the co-payments for physical therapy on top of what the insurance is paying that practice,
yes.
versus a dance class, you're only paying the fee to have the teacher, not the extra hidden deductibles and stuff like that.
There's no real magic here.
We're getting. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
So let's take a break. This is an interesting discussion. So can we pick it up again? We come back for a few minutes and then we'll move.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I just think we should probably take a break.
Let's take a break and then.
We have some little snacks too, so you guys maybe do.
That's the best part. I didn't even have snacks.